Hello, everyone. This is Jefferson Hendricks of Centenary College of Louisiana and the Robinson Film Center, welcoming you to Film 101, where we recommend a film that you might want to watch this week while we're all practicing social distancing. Our co-host, Alyssa Fife, president of the Centenary Film Society, is not able to join us this week. She's busy working, but she'll be back next week. Today, I want to recommend a film that continues with our theme of the fantastic. It's actually not a film, but a TV series called Outlander. Perhaps many of you have already seen it. Perhaps some of you haven't seen it. Maybe you've heard about it. I've just started watching it this past week, and I'm really intrigued by it, though I have a caveat of warning that I'll mention at the end. So, what is Outlander, and why do I recommend it for you to take a look at? Outlander is a mashup series of different genres. It is part romantic storytelling, part historical fiction, part science fiction and fantasy, all couched in a strong adventure ethos. So, what is the plot and what is the setting? It is set originally. The opening scene is 1945, and Claire Randall, a nurse for 5 years, having seen the horrors of World War II, working in various hospitals, returns home, reunited to her husband, Frank, who is a history professor. He had been working in the war during British intelligence. They take a second honeymoon to get connected to each other again after being apart for 5 years during the war, and they go to Scotland. There, in a rather fantastic moment, after a mystical druid ceremony, Claire is transported, bam, quickly, out of the blue, 200 years before, to 1743, in that exact place in Scotland. What she finds immediately is a war, essentially, between the occupying British forces and the Scottish Highlanders who want autonomy and freedom from the British. She gets involved immediately in the politics and the violence of that world. She also, almost immediately, gets harassed, and even more so, by a British captain named Black Jack Randall, who, by the way, happens to be a relative, she finds out, of her husband back in 1945. Not too long afterwards, Claire is rescued and gets connected to a Scottish farmer/nobleman, Jamie Fraser. And Claire falls slowly but intensely in love with Jamie. She is then faced in this dilemma. What is she to do? Does she try to get back to her life with Frank, her loving, thoughtful, sensitive history professor husband in 1945? Or does she stay in Scotland, increasingly attracted to Jamie Fraser, who is brave, heroic, strong, a very typical and in some ways almost stereotypical romantic hero, but with a twist? So that is Claire's dilemma. I won't go much further than that. I don't want to give too many spoilers away. But the story centers around Claire, a very 20th century woman, a strong, articulate woman living in this very patriarchal, very, to our minds, old-fashioned world. Essentially, what's a woman to do in that situation? So, why do I recommend it? What makes this story worth following? What makes this series perhaps worth giving it your time? At least three major reasons, I think. One is the acting. Caitríona Balfe, who is an Irish actress originally, who was a bit of a supermodel earlier in her career and turned to acting, does an outstanding job here. She is really wonderful as Claire Fraser, who stands up to this very different world than she's accustomed to in 1945. Very witty, very smart, a nurse who easily could be a medical doctor. And in fact, that gets her in some trouble. People in 1743 think she might be a bit of a witch, knowing what she knows about medicine. Secondly, Sam Hugan, a Scottish actor who plays Jamie Fraser, the romantic hero here, is equally wonderful in his strength, but also in his sensitivity. He's a very traditional romantic hero, but with another side to him. And they two together, frankly, heat up the screen a bit. Thirdly, in this essentially romantic triangle of sorts, Tobias Menzies, a British actor, plays both Frank Randall, her husband in 1945, and also Blackjack John Randall, Frank's relative in the 18th century. And the shift between those two characters that Tobias Menzies handles is just really wonderful. I have to say that Blackjack Randall is one of the more interesting and scary villains that I've seen in quite a while, primarily because I can't read him. It's hard to know exactly where he's coming from. It's hard to know what he's thinking and ultimately what he wants. But he is certainly villainous and very, very, very curious tastes and interests, as you'll see in the film. So the acting is just, I think, really, really good. The smaller parts are also wonderfully handled. Secondly, the setting is outstanding. If you love Scotland, if you're interested in kilts, you'll see more kilts in this movie than perhaps you've ever seen in your life. But shot on location in Scotland, outstanding scenery, a strong, strong sense. And even though the root of the film is fantastic, where Claire gets transported back in time, the film itself is grittily realistic. There is much violence in the fighting, and Claire, as a healer, has to handle some outrageous wounds. It doesn't spare the more sensitive natures that might be watching it. But the overall setting, the costuming is really powerful and wonderful. Thirdly, the idea itself, I think, is quite interesting if you're at all interested in the fantastic. Time travel is fairly central to the fantastic science fiction side of fantasy, going back at least to H.G. Wells and his work. And basically, Claire's dilemma is, what do you do if you go back in time and you know that your actions might affect the future? Blackjack Randall is a villain that deserves to be killed. It's clear that that's what people want to do to him. But yet, if he's killed, Frank, her husband in the 20th century, may not exist. He may not come to be. And Claire is torn by this and has to wrestle with that dilemma. In short, if you're interested in romance, if you're interested in historical fiction, if you're interested in fantasy like the Game of Thrones, then you might really enjoy Outlander. So hopefully all will work out for you. Let me warn you, though, this series is about as intimately explicit as anything I've ever seen on TV. So be aware, this is a very hard R, and there are some scenes that I know have chased a few viewers away from the series. They are so explicit. But if you have a tolerance for that and you're interested in historical fiction and fantasy, good acting, great scenery, and some interesting intellectual quandaries about what it might be like to affect the past and how that might affect the future, give Outlander a check. See if it might be something you're interested in. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.